Well, welcome back, everyone. My name's Kenneth Martin, and I'm the host of the Hard Hat Talks podcast. I'm joined today by Willie Hume. Willie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Willie, you've had Terrenus Land and Water for quite some time. I mean, I've been doing here block architects for nearly 21 years, and I can remember you in my black book going away back till then. It was with you.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Willie, tell the listeners a little bit about you and how you got involved in the industry.
Right, well, Terrenus we date back to 2000. We set it up, and that was a colleague of mine, Fraser Duff, and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And we started over in East Kilbride and then grew from there with various being battered along the way, as you are when you're trying to run and create a business. But thinking about your question there, I mean, I'm a geologist by trade. So I did geology at Glasgow University, and then I had a hankering to do water as a second string to my bow. So I went down to Bedfordshire to do a postgraduate diploma in soil and water engineering. And that allowed me to, I started work in the Glasgow area as a geotechnical environmental engineer, a good basis for learning stuff in this kind of trade. A broad education, if you can put it that way, before I went off to become a water engineer in West Africa. I did that for about 5 years. Took 2 children out there, came back with 3. That's not 3 more
Something
than 2,
in the water.
And so that kind of scratched an itch that I had. I wanted to do that for relief and development work.
Right.
Came back, and then when you come back from doing something like that, it changes you for a start, and then you try and say, right, what can I do? And if nobody's offering you a job, how are you going to feed the family? And it was as simple as that. I started off as a sole trader, and then it didn't blossom from there because you're basically just making ends meet. But I had good conversations with Fraser, my colleague, and we decided to set up Terrenus together. And one of these kind of things that Fraser's surname is Duff, my name is Hume. Sometimes you combine things to try and make a useful phrase to make a company name. Hume and Duff doesn't do that.
No.
It just doesn't work that way. So Terrenus, as in of the soil, was where we landed.
Excellent.
And from there, effectively, we've made the company go.
Excellent. So it's I guess like in the construction industry, there's loads of different career paths, but and forgive me for saying this, I've never heard anyone saying, I want to go and do water or land, albeit there's plenty of you guys and women out there doing it. So what was it, from your younger days, what was it that made you decide you wanted to get into that particular field?
I think generally speaking, we do things, there's a push and a pull to what we do. Some things you want to do, and if you really want to do something, you will create heaven, you will move heaven and earth to make it happen. And sometimes there's a pull. When I was first looking for work, I was newly married, didn't have any job, finding work here and there, and I applied to join the police force. I applied to join the fire brigade, and I was in that process of going through the selection process when suddenly something came up which they gave me a bite at, being a site investigation with Norwest Hole Soil Engineering, as was in those days. And I think it's one of those kind of things that you fall into things. If you're lucky in life, you will enjoy what you fall into. But you always have a choice. You can either get out of it if you really want to.
Yeah.
It just takes determination to do so. But for me, the merging of geology, which I've always enjoyed. I started doing geology when I was still at school.
Right.
Usual things of banging the rocks together and looking at gemstones and so on.
Right.
But being able to make things, and you'll understand this because this is part and parcel of what you are. What gives you pleasure when you drive through Scotland? It'll be, I helped make that. And that will outlast me.
Yeah.
And it's that feeling, if you can drive in the car with your kids and say, I helped make that, or I made that, or I was a good part of that, or I stopped doing that because it was bad. And that gives me a tremendous satisfaction to have a body of work that will outlast me. That,
A bit of a legacy then.
I wouldn't go so far as a legacy, but it's because again, my job is done by the time you put the foundations in. But
Okay, yeah.
it gives me satisfaction to know that I've helped do something in the world which is actually beyond my own scope, beyond my own lifetime. And if you can do it well, and you can actually improve the environment, that's something to take pride in. I know people who've got jobs where they don't get that kind of satisfaction. It's a big thing for me.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I think for me as well, there's a big thing about leaving a legacy. You know, for me, there's a bit leaving a legacy. You know, because as architects, we do get involved in the bigger picture, not just the bit that you're talking about. Whilst we are involved in it as well to some extent, because often you're managing that whole process.
Very often you are.
But it's interesting. I mean, I drive around all over Lanarkshire, and I've done loads of projects in Lanarkshire, either personally or with the team. And my kids drive around and go, "Dad, before you say it, we know you did something in that building. You know, yeah, we know you did that balcony. Yeah, we know you did that." I go, right, okay, you know. And to the extent you can see my wife's eyes rolling in the back of her head when we drive past these buildings. But for me, it's a good thing. And then I think at my tender age of 49 and 99%, because I'm 50 next week, I think it's that thing of now, what's the next 10 years going to bring, you know? And for me, that is legacy. That is how do we, make sure the business thrives and survives over the next 10 years, that it's here for the next generations of business managers and owners. Tell me a wee bit then about Terrenus and where you're at just now, because you've got a fairly sizable team.
Well, you'll remember 2007, 2008.
Hated it.
It was awful. I've been through. I'm now 61.
Wearing very well.
Thank you. And I've seen a number of recessions. Some of them didn't touch me at all. Some of them .com bubble.
Yep.
Didn't care. Others have hit me like a ton of bricks. And the 2008 one was the ton of bricks. And Terrenus at that point went down from a staff of 15 down to 3.
I remember that.
It was so painful.
Yeah.
People just stopped building, and that was it. You'll remember whole sites were effectively not derelict but the mothballed. They just stopped on a
overnight.
Overnight.
There were stories of banks opening up sites and saying that's fine, your funds in place. Then 2 weeks later, the site stops because the banks say no funding.
Yes. No, it was so painful. So to go through that and then to have to rebuild yourself takes an enormous amount of energy and time. I'm a firm believer that if you want to build something, a company, the biggest thing you need is energy. It's not money. You'll get money somehow.
Yeah.
Begging, borrowing, and stealing it. It's a talent. Yes, it's a prerequisite, but it's not the only thing. Most of it's energy.
Yeah.
You've got to get up in the morning and you've got to say, I want to do that. I want to see that advance. And as you say, looking into a crystal ball and seeing, like, where am I going and how am I going to get there? And you do that every day, day in, day out, and it never stops.
Yep.
It's very invigorating, but exhausting at the same time.
It's the curse and the skill of the entrepreneur, isn't it?
It works both ways.
It works both ways.
So after 2008, we spent the doldrum years, and it was a long, hard slog, and we're only now getting back up to a team that I'm feeling is really competent. I've got a number of terms in my head which I use. I try not to use the word excellence because it's one of those kind of rare things that it comes and goes. Competency, oh, that's good. If you're competent, that's something you can build on that. You can build on competency. And I feel I've got a competent team behind me now. So we're 10 strong.
Good.
And the interesting thing is that time was where you'd have everybody in the office and you'd have this dynamic going on in the office. Nowadays, we've got one member of staff in Annan who logs in 4 days a week. He's semi-retired. I've got a bookkeeper who's in Toronto, Canada, who's just logged on. I've just spoken to her. So she comes on in her morning and our afternoon. And you've got this kind of different dynamic going on, but you still need to bind this together as a team. And how you do that is it comes down to how you play your cards, how you use technology now. It's a big thing. I've seen Microsoft Teams and other platforms like that come of age, when they don't fall over so much.
Yeah.
And you can actually build a team round about that. But you've got to be careful about how people react and what matters to people. I'm thinking of things like during COVID, obviously we weren't allowed to meet in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So we did everything through Teams. We didn't stop, we never stopped, but we did manage it through Teams. And as soon as we could, we opened up the office. Why? Because a lot of our staff members were at that point single guys, and this was their social.
Yeah. Yeah.
They weren't going to be allowed to go out to the pub.
Yep.
But they were allowed to go to work. So this became a thing which was worth something.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've found it's been a long, hard slog coming away from the crash of 2008. But now I feel I've got something I can really work with, which is good.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in a similar position, because I remember 2008 having a team of 5 at the time, but that was over a course of 18 months. We grew out from nothing to a team of 5.
Yes.
And then the work just dried up completely overnight. I think it was like something like £200,000 worth of pre-confirmed orders that just dropped off the shelf in a matter of no time. And it was just a hard slog to try and keep people in work. And like you, the one thing I've found is that, times just now in the construction industry aren't great. Nothing's setting the hell on fire, but we're all ticking over. But it's a constant fight to retain the talent that you've got. And that's my fight, my struggle, because I remembered all those years ago, 2007, 2008, where we got rid of the talent because we had to, and trying to get that energy back up to get out your bed in the morning, to recruit new talent with the fear that maybe something's going to drop off again. That just was something that really slowed the growth of my business.
Yes.
And every day I fight to make sure, let's try and keep the talent we've got, because they're competent, as you say, they're good, we deliver good stuff. But I don't want to go back to that, 2-3 staff, as well, just closing the door and forgetting about it this time,
Absolutely. And you know as well as I do that if you've got somebody who is worth, then trying to replace that person is doubly expensive.
Yeah.
It's not just the loss of time to try and do this. It's not even just the loss, but it's the amount of time it's taken that person to mature into that role. And very often it'll take 9 months, 18 months plus to actually have the person functioning really well. And again, that's up to them. It's up to you. It's up to the environment you create. And it's up to sometimes just dumb luck, so you get the jobs coming in that you can really work with. So it's an interesting one. You've got a lot of plates spinning all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we kind of love it, because that's why we do it.
Yes, there is a point in that. Yes, there is a point in that.
So land and water then is an interesting one. Land and water is something that I've came across for 20 odd years, having to deal with it. And by and large, Terrenus is probably our go-to guys to try and help us and help our clients fix these issues. But I have to say that I think, like any profession, land and water issues are something that's becoming much more difficult to resolve, to get involved in, to educate yourself on. It must be changing all the time, because I know policy changes all the time. And that really kind of brings us to the big burning question, and why this podcast is what it is we really want to kind of deep dive into, what's the biggest challenges facing professions today. So with that in mind, Willie, what is the big thing that's your challenge? Is it the challenge for you as a company, perhaps, or the challenge that you have to resolve for your clients? What's really burning a hole in your brain, thinking, if I could just fix these one or two things, then we can potentially help the UK construction industry?
Oof, that's a broad question, that.
Yeah.
Taking a wee step back, what I see in land and water is you've got a natural environment, and on top of that you've got the man-made world. Now, the man-made world is designed. It has a bending moment, it has a structure, it has streets, it has street furniture. It's all the things that we create, and we know what it is because we've made it. The natural world, including the water world, we haven't. We might have affected it, but we haven't made it. So it's got a complexity that is not familiar to us. You only know that when you actually investigate for that site. It's a variable.
Interesting perspective.
And it's a very exciting variable. It means that your job is always changing. But the problem there is that because it's a variable, you have to study it bespoke for every site. Each site is different. Site investigation works. That's a new thing every time you go. You might find what you expect to find. You're on an old gasworks site. You'd expect to find pollution.
Mm-hmm.
But where is it? What is it? What about the floating oils? What about the sinking oils? All these things would be part and parcel of that. It's a new investigation every time. With water and with things like flood risk, you have an added problem, and to a large extent with contaminated land, you've got the fear factor. You've got people who are frightened of flooding, and rightly so. Nobody wants to be flooded out. People who are frightened of contamination in the soil. Nobody wants to come up against contamination. And you have an issue where who are the people who have written the regulations? They will be influenced by the experts, but they themselves are not experts. Usually people who write the regulations are politicians and lawyers, usually both. So that they are wanting to provide something which provides safety to people. And if you want, from a regulatory point of view, to have the maximum amount of protection, what you will do is you'll try and make it you'll avoid the problem as much as possible. So that if you've got contamination under our feet, you'll want to make sure none of it gets to you. Mm-hmm. If there's flooding over there, they'll want to make sure that none of this gets to you as the homeowner or the site owner. If you do that, then you're talking avoidance every time. That, in a nutshell, I think is where we are with the regulatory process when it comes to the environment. Mm-hmm. We are trying to avoid everything. And the problem with that is you can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. And we'll probably come on to the whole issue of the new SEPA flood maps, which I would like to bring up later. But there you've gone from not having a problem to having a problem. And the only difference is you've assessed it differently. Yeah. So as soon as you start drilling down, then you'll find problems everywhere. If you want to find lead in the soil, you will find natural occurring lead. Mm-hmm. You've got, what about radon? You've got a naturally occurring radon. Mm-hmm. Soil gas, you can have naturally occurring soil gas, or you could have mine gas, or you could have gas coming out of a landfill site nearby. Yeah. What are your thresholds becomes a really thorny issue. And if you're trying to avoid it all the time, that's a big problem.
So, talking about those issues then, and your current client base, are you finding that I think that, well, what you've mentioned there is there's policy, lawyers and what have you writing these policies. I get the inclination then that that's slowing down things for maybe how fast you I don't mean it's not to be thorough, but how fast you used to get through your workload, because there's maybe more complexity, but also how is that affecting the developer at the end? Is that meaning that more sites are just undevelopable, or it's just taking longer to get through the check processes?
Probably the latter rather than the former.
Right.
It's probably just taking longer.
Right.
I sympathise with anybody who's trying to develop land, particularly those who are trying to develop a single plot in their garden because they happen to have a big garden. It can be a vale of tears. Mm-hmm. I have less sympathy for the volume house builders, right, because they've got their people and they know the job, and mm-hmm. they've got experts here, there and everywhere. Mm-hmm. And yourselves, you're part of that expertise. Yeah. But it's going to take you time. One of the things that we live in a place where it's an opinion, but my opinion is that the planning process goes through the local councils. The councils are in charge of that. The councils have, largely speaking, lost all their talent. We're talking about talent, mm-hmm. and when mm-hmm. you lose it, it's difficult to get back. The councils, more than many others, have lost a lot of that talent. By natural wastage, they've not made them redundant, but they've mm-hmm. let them go. And they haven't brought in new talent. And they've let those parts of their organisation wither on the vine. And that concerns me a great deal. It means that they're ticking boxes rather than actually being engineers or being specialists who can rely on things. Mm. And one of the big things that we find, if you're a council and you've got a flood team, you might know your stuff, but you're overwhelmed with the amount of work. Mm-hmm. And then you will tend to rely on other people like, say, SEPA. Now, SEPA have no axe to grind when it comes to the development process. Their only remit is protection. It's in the name. Mm-hmm. So they will try and avoid it at all times.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with what they do, but they're one side of the equation, not both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the council are actually trying to see development happen. But if you don't know what you're talking about, you'll tend to look at SEPA and say, they're the experts, they've developed the SEPA flood maps, I'm going to listen to them. And the SEPA says, no, we object to this. You're then going to slow down. And if that objection by, say, SEPA isn't actually, there's no legal requirement for you to stop, but it will force it to go to Scottish ministers. That process, even if SEPA say, no, we're quite comfortable with it now, that could cost you 3 months. If it goes to Scottish ministers, that could cost you 2 years, 2.5 years. How many projects do you know can just sit on their hands for 2 years
not many.
waiting?
Yeah.
And that's a big problem, taking time. The other problem that we find, because we live in a time when money is everything, I'm finding that you're trying to put a lot of the solutions at the front end of the process. So you come to me and say, right, I want to build a house here. And I say, right, okay, you're going to need this, 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 and this. That's just my ken.
Yeah.
It's not the whole thing.
No.
You've still got bat surveys and noise and all these other good things to do. And all of that's going to have to be done before you get approval. So you've not got approval. You're going to the bank and the bank's saying, right, once you've got approval, we'll give you your money. But you haven't got the money, but everybody's asking you for 5,000, 10,000 or whatever it is. In site investigation costs, in analysis, in bat surveys, all these other things. Necessary though they may be, you're not being allowed to put them aside, get your planning approval, and then deal with them. No, you have to deal with them front end. And that is A, slower, and B, much more expensive.
Yeah, I think I can kind of corroborate with that, because years and years ago, a lot of these reports and processes, procedures that are now mandatory through the planning process were things that were either never asked for or would be conditioned as part and parcel of the approval. And I think we don't do as many one-off houses now, but doing one-off houses, the client can be anywhere between £40,000-50,000.
Yes.
Just to get architects, reports, drawings through the planning fees, building control fees, bat surveys, whatever specific reports are required for the site. And when they're doing that on, say, maybe a £300,000-400,000 house build, that's a lot of money.
Yes.
That's a big. Never mind the land cost as well.
Yes.
So it is a bit of a challenge, and I think my opinion is that I think that sometimes the local authorities, I don't just mean planning or building control, but the local authorities and those who write the rules really don't understand that these things become quite prohibitive in terms of whether a project should start in the first place. It's a long journey. It's a tiresome journey for the client, particularly those clients who've never done it before.
Yes.
We're trying to see a switch. We would never necessarily turn away a one-off house, but trying to see a switch to dealing with clients who have been through the process or are certainly aware of the fact that, look, this is a big project, we're going to have to do all these reports to get through the process. And I think there's potentially we need to get a bit more of a joined up approach as to how we deal with these. I'm thinking actually, I'm not to talk over you as such, but we've got one job that's come in. It's to deal with a planning condition, and it's to write a pre-construction phase transport management plan.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, well, okay, but all we're trying to do just now is try and clear the conditions. That is one of the conditions, but we actually don't know who the contractor's going to be.
So how can you
So we're writing something up front to try and preempt, and we're not contractors, but we're writing these things up front to try and preempt who the contractor might be when the client eventually gets round to putting out to tender and appointing someone. So that's where the kind of horse and cart analogy comes in. There's maybe too many powers, I think, for planners to ask for some of these, not all of them, but some of these reports up front. And then, of course, I've got to put myself in the planner's shoes and think, well, actually, all of these reports that are being asked for on the basis of good practice. They don't ask them because they want them. They ask them because someone's been caught out in the past.
Yeah.
There's been an accident or a site issue or something.
Yes.
Yeah. So these are the kind of challenges that we see as well.
I think there are two types of problems with developing a site. There are the problems that you can have, which are need to be engineered. Most of our problems you and I deal with are things that need to be engineered. Things like sustainable drainage systems, things like access routes, curves on roads, all these other things, the drainage structures, the height of the building, all of these things are engineered, and it's very often a cost benefit analysis that's going on at the same time. That's one side. The other side is actually a stop sign. And there aren't very many of those, but they do exist. I would say even things like you've got underground mine workings, that could ruin a project because it's not cost effective to proceed, but it's not a stop sign. It's just too expensive. But there are some stop signs, and one of those is the flood risk. You just won't be allowed to do it.
Right.
Simple as that. And there aren't that many of them.
So we're talking really about the flood maps and SEPA, how sometimes that can be a showstopper for clients.
Yes.
So what's I mean, I'm aware things have changed over the last 12 months or so with SEPA flood maps, because we were involved with some projects ourselves. So tell us a wee bit about what's changed then for the viewers so that they can get an understanding.
Okay, we're going to go two things.
Cool. Yeah.
First thing, one that you will be well aware of, NPF 4. National Planning Framework 4.
It's like swearing in here saying that word.
It's a document. It's rather short. It's quite short. But one wouldn't call it detailed.
One wouldn't, or one
wouldn't call it detailed.
I would agree. Yeah.
I would call it a statement of intent, a document of aspiration. It wants to see something happen, and in that sense, it's quite a good thing. It's discussing these things. But it falls down with not having enough detail sometimes, so that the interpretation becomes it boils down to the interpretation. And then, of course, you've got each council interpreting it slightly differently. And you get the likes of SEPA, who have been a party to the writing of this. They've got their own interpretation. They will have guidelines which become de facto rules because they're a national body. So that's one side of the coin. And what happened with NPF 4 was that up to that point, we had two standards of development flood risk in broad terms. You had the functional floodplain, and that was seen as the 1 in 200 year event, and that was what it was. And then you had the actual design level of water, which is the 1 in 200 year plus climate change, whatever the climate change was. You had other standards as well, but those were the two key things. Backtrack a little bit. Are you a gambling man?
I'm a gambling man. I put £1 on in the sweep and the golf. That's about it. I've never won it.
Of course you haven't. If I've got a 0.5% probability, what does that mean to you?
0.5% probability?
Yeah. 0.5% probability. 1 in 200 year, 1 in 200 chance.
It's very unlikely to happen.
Very unlikely. Have you ever bet on a horse as 1 in 200?
Yeah, but what's the point?
You'd be, what's the point?
Yeah.
But does it happen? Of course it does. If you take a lottery ticket, it's millions to one. Here we're talking about a flooding event which is 1 in 200 year, which is the same as 1/200th of it happening every year. Not ever, but every year. It's a 0.5% chance of it happening each and every year. So if you build a property, what's the lifetime of your average house? What are we designing for these days?
Well, it's an interesting one. I would say, relatively maintenance free, maybe 25 years.
25 years.
But I mean, they'll be there for much longer.
Of course. If you've designed it for, say, 50 years, then you've got a 30% chance of actually seeing the 1 in 200 year storm. It becomes really quite likely that your house will see the one. You might not, because you might not be present at the time, or you might see it twice. But those are the sort of statistics we're talking about. And what NPF 4 did was it merged those two things together. So instead of there being a functional floodplain, and you can't go into the functional floodplain at 1 in 200 year, but designing for 1 in 200 year plus climate change, they merged the two and said, 1 in 200 year plus climate change, that's your law. So So you've got to design and avoid that.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a whole lot of sites where you had to step back from that which you thought was true and had suddenly changed. So that's the first thing. NPF4 had that big impact on flooding.
Mm-hmm.
That brought in a whole lot of things with NPF4. SEPA brought in a futures flood map around about the same time. And they brought it in for fluvial, that's the rivers, and they brought it in for the coastal, for tidal. So those two things had a future flood map. They've now recently, and this is mid-month last month, so it's fresh, they've brought in the surface water. And those three things are the three ways that you could flood, according to SEPA in their flood maps.
Mm-hmm.
There are other ways, drainage failures and all these other good things as well. But if we just focus in on SEPA at the moment, you've got those three different things: the fluvial, the rivers, the coastal, and the surface water. Now, the surface water, they have taken what they did have and they've now bolted on the future.
Mm-hmm.
But they've done more than that. Have you come across LiDAR data?
LiDAR, yeah, we've heard of LiDAR, yeah.
So LiDAR data is where you're going to get a good representation of the surface of the ground.
Yes.
Now, you've got really poor quality LiDAR data, which is 5 meter sides to it. Every resolution is 5 meters in size, or rather 5 by 5, 25 square meters. And you get that from photogrammetry, and you get that up in the highlands and outside the central belt. In the central belt, where we are just now, you've got phase 5. You've not got phase 6 where we're sitting just now, but you've got phase 5, phase 4, with a bit of a poor one, phase 1, and each one is getting more and more accurate.
Right.
So you get very good quality. And the most recent one is 0.5 meter is your cell size. So what SEPA have done is they've taken the whole of the country, the whole of Scotland, and they've taken all this different patchwork of LiDAR data and photogrammetry data, and they've assessed it and they've resolved it down to a 2 meter square.
Right.
So you've got the whole of Scotland covered by 2 meter square. And then what they've done is they've calculated what the peak rainfall would be for the 200-year storm and the 200-year storm with climate change. There's a whole lot of big data going on behind this.
Just to be clear, this 200-year storm, is that, in my head, that's the biblical storm? That's, am I right in saying it? Just to give someone an impression of what that might look like. Because we see loads of, I mean, we watch social media, etc. Sorry for interrupting you, but we watch social media, we watch the news, and we see disasters all over the world, you know. And I get that this is happening, I get that it's real, but I guess maybe some of the skeptics out there might say that stuff's always happened. It's just that we see it much more now because of the media.
And you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. If you look at a water course, my problem is that it's dealing with a moving target.
Right.
If you go back a century, the 1 in 200-year storm would probably be different than it is now. Because you've got more data, your curve, imagine across a graph, and you've got the number of times, it'll be more or less a straight line, and you've got a number of times you've got time and peak volume going down a water course. So you've got at somewhere along that line and the A line going between the two axes, you've got time and amount of volume. And you've got spots. These are actually events that have actually happened over the last, say, 50 years. And then you'll get in a really extreme, and that'll come much further out on the graph here. And then you'll be able to extend the graph a little bit. We haven't got the data for a 200-year storm.
Right, okay.
Nobody's got it. Nobody's been measuring it for that long. So what we do is we extend the line. And a 200-year storm is not that unusual, but it is pretty unusual. It's nasty. But for some things, for schools and so on, we're being asked to look at a 1 in 1,000-year storm. And nobody's got that kind of data. So we're extending this line beyond what would be comfortable, shall we say. And we're just bolting on precaution against precaution against precaution. Nobody's arguing against it,
right?
Because nobody wants to be flooded. But we are trying to balance risk. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be easy to do these sort of things. But yes, you're right. Is it the part of the if have you ever stood in a 200-year storm? A little storm, perhaps, is really heavy,
Mm-hmm.
but one that would raise the Clyde to its huge 200-year flood event may never happen because it'll happen in some parts of the Clyde, but not in other parts of the Clyde.
Yep.
We were doing an investigation on the River Kelvin, and they had looked at that for this particular storm event, and they found that some of the Kelvin had that, and some of them didn't. And this is only a few miles apart,
Right.
because you tend to get this cloud burst. You know yourself,
Mm-hmm.
storms are not, everybody's wet,
Yeah.
but some parts are wetter than other parts.
Yep.
So you'll get this kind of patchwork affair. We're never going to be perfect at this.
Mm-hmm.
We're always a model. Define a model.
Define a model.
Yeah, any model.
Oh, the model I would define is probably different from the model that you guys would work with. But
it's a facsimile of real life.
Yeah,
I've got a toy car here, and it's like real life, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
The same is true of a flood model.
Yeah.
It's like real life, but it's not. And we're doing the best we can to actually risk assess.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're looking at this kind of stuff, we are pulling together the best available data and getting the most realistic results that we can get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But make no bones about it, there are lots and lots of variables in there and quite a bit of judgment involved.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to get the science all the way, but you're always going to have a little bit of judgment going on as to what can or what cannot happen. And when we're looking at this 200-year plus climate change for the surface water and the way that SEPA have reduced the size of the cells on the topography that they're dealing with, what you've got a map. Imagine yourself a map on the ground here, and you pour water out of the sky, and then you watch the water flow away.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the electronic model is doing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And there are three things that make up a decent model. There's the topography, which has got to be as accurate as you possibly can, including things like buildings and so on. You've got the amount of water coming out of the sky, which is another whole set of variables.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the roughness of the land, which allows the water to flow over it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you get those three things, you throw them in the model, and then you watch the model and resolve that, and the water flows around. The upshot of what SEPA have now done, and this is by a consultants, JPA I think it is, who have developed this for them, they now have these surface water maps.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fluvial maps for SEPA kick in properly at catchments greater than 10 square kilometres.
Okay.
But they do work down to 3 square kilometres.
Mm-hmm.
So they're dealing with small catchments, but not very small catchments. The surface water analysis goes from more or less 0 up to 10 square kilometres. So you've got this boundary in between when the fluvial ones really aren't very good.
Mm.
And what SEPA have said is we're going to treat the surface water analysis, the surface water flood map, as a proxy for fluvial. So if you go on to the SEPA flood maps, freely available, just go onto their website, you'll find there's blue, and that's fluvial.
Mm-hmm.
There's pink, and that's surface water, and there's green, and that's the coastal.
Yeah.
So for the small catchments, they're looking at the pink one for small catchments up to 10 square kilometres, at which point it becomes fluvial. But it's a good deal. It's so accurate, or apparently accurate, that you've got a site which 2 months ago didn't flood. Now I'm telling you, look at the SEPA flood map and you've got water courses going through it.
Mm.
Is that true? Discuss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem that we're getting now is we're getting the appearance of accuracy,
Right.
not necessarily the truth. And one of the things you notice when you open the SEPA flood map website is this is not suitable as a site-specific.
Mm.
But for your average planner, they're going to see that and say, this is the best available information I've got. So unless you can prove that it's not true,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with the risk, and I'm going to say, no, you can't do this unless you prove it, that it isn't a problem.
Yeah. So in some respects then, in simple terms, there's sites there then that in the past one would have thought in terms of surface water flooding, flooding's not an issue. Because as an architect, I would sometimes look up the flood plan and go, right, okay, surface water's fine, that's fine. Okay, there's maybe a water course nearby. We know we need to involve you, but surface water's fine. Really, what we're saying now is if you've got a degree of that colour, is it pink? That the pinkish colour.
Look at the pink.
Look at the pink. If there's pink on the map, then that's what the planner's going to do. So chances are we need a William Hume to come in and do some kind of desktop or some kind of reporting to say, look, we know we've got the SEPA flood maps, but actually, they aren't.
I think another string to this particular bow. SEPA did say before that they were leaving the surface water to the councils. You could engineer that.
Right.
Now they've said we're not going to say. Basically, NPF4 is going back to this broad scope that NPF4 is. They're not going to say anything, so everything's worked the same. So any flooding, whether it's the pink, the blue, or the green, you've got to avoid.
Yeah.
And I've got sites. Just had a site about 3 weeks ago where it was fine, and then they had the surface water, the pink, going through the site. At which point the council said, "You're going to have to prove that doesn't happen." Now, we've got some excellent flood modelers in the company, and Johnny got the bit between his teeth on this one. Decided to run a detailed rain on grid model for this particular site. At which point the problem went away.
Right.
Because the SEPA map is fine for a national exercise, but it's not site specific.
Right.
So curbs, all these other things, we've got our own survey staff, and we've got two actually. We invested in those because we need that kind of accuracy for every time we do flood risk. We need to be able to truth the LiDAR or find out where the base of the channel is and all these other things. We need to find that out accurately, because otherwise we're doing the same as SEPA. We've got to have better data than SEPA to be able to say, no, ours is the best available information. And with that, we can resolve a lot of the problems. Not all of them, a lot of them. And
So it kind of strikes me again, though, that for the right reasons, this process is in place, but ultimately the developer who's looking to develop is the person who's left carrying the bill to try and prove that the map, depending on how accurate it is in the first place, is wrong. Or right.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think because flooding is one of these stop sign things where you might not be allowed to build anywhere on the site. It's a possibility of that, and there's no engineering way around about it. We're used to, if you've got poor ground conditions, or if you've got this or you got that, you will find a way around about it. If somebody wants to have more bedrooms in their house, you will find a way to be able to engineer that. So they can have that extra bedroom. That's part of your skill base. You solve the problem. That's what gets you up in the morning. Flooding you may not be able to build at all. It's a red light. So if you want to try and, our advice is get involved as soon as you can, preferably before you buy the land.
Yeah, so I think that was my next question, because obviously as architects and architects that are listening to this, project managers, we would probably say, right, let's have an overview of the project at the start and think which reports, which professional consultants are we likely to require here in order to get it through the various processes. It kind of strikes me then that flooding might become we always analyse sites against flooding, of course we do, but it might be something that becomes much more prevalent. We on sites, as you say, in the past where no flooding was present, we go, it'll be fine. Now a little bit of pink going, right, well, actually we need to get someone in. How is that? Have you seen any effect of that yet on your developers in terms of, can you categorically say that yes, we are getting asked now for more flood risk analysis, and is it slowing things down, or is it just the same, or is it too early to say?
I don't know if it's slowing things down, because things were pretty slow anyway.
Right. Okay.
I'm not going to be able to gild the lily on that one. But we're certainly being asked to revisit sites in the light of the new surface water SEPA flood maps.
Right. Okay.
it's going to become a problem.
Mhm.
Now, because SEPA have backed out of saying that you can engineer around the surface water, it means you've got all this pink stuff going around the urban environment as well, which normally would go down a gully.
Mhm.
Now, the SEPA map doesn't have any of these gullies involved at all. They do have 15 millimeters per hour as a drainage function
Mhm.
on their model, but it doesn't reflect what's actually there.
What's actually there?
So you have an issue whereby you've got all these pink lines going through it. You want to develop, a gap site,
Mhm.
but it's got some of this pink going through it. The council wants you to do something. They really want it to be developed, but they can't because there's pink going through it.
Mhm.
And that's where you need this expertise coming in. And the expertise is more than, we're a million miles away from being, trust me, I'm an engineer.
Mhm.
That
Yeah.
doesn't get you past it now. You've got to do the modelling. You've got to do things.
But it's probably one of those ones I'm sitting thinking to myself, is this the government at its best? I mean the government, the royal, the government, but I'm not trying to specifically say it's one person or one department, but we're in this position whereby they've got the right to put out information and then ask us to prove it if it's right or wrong. Where really we want to say, well, why don't you just put the right information out in the first place and then let us get on with building?
Yes. You're right, but it all comes down to fear and risk. The last thing that SEPA can do on behalf of the government is saying that's okay. They're wanting my professional indemnity insurance to take the burden.
Yeah.
Your professional indemnity insurance to take the burden that you're doing.
Yep.
They don't want to take that risk on. They want to warn you, and that's, to be fair, it's a laudable thing. They want to warn us when there's a problem. But they don't want to take on the responsibility.
Yeah.
Beyond that.
I just feel as if there could come a point where they just put pink everywhere and say,
well,
why don't you just come every project just tell us there's no flooding?
I feel we're very close to that now.
Yeah.
And it'll be up to the councils to interpret this data correctly. Now, where we don't know, what we're trying to do within Terrenus at this point in time is, right, give people like yourself a good amount of information for you to make valued judgment calls. And that's part of what we're discussing today. The second thing I want to do is to find out, right, do we have to spend the client's money resolving this by throwing money at it? And the problem that I've got is we can easily, by spending a little bit of time, a little bit of money, we're talking for an average site, £5,000, £6,000, £7,000. So it's not huge, but it's still significant. It's £7,000 that people don't have.
It's half a car.
It's half a car. It's half a car. Yeah. So we're trying to avoid spending that. Is there a way that we can get round, particularly with regards to this surface water flood risk that is causing a lot of struggle in the development market now? It's very fresh, considered. It's still immature in its consideration. From the guidelines point of view for each and every council. It's being pushed forward by Glasgow City, Edinburgh, one or two others are pushing it. We know Glasgow are particularly enthusiastic because they've had sight of this new flood maps for several months now. We've only just had them.
Right.
So it's a new thing on the marketplace. Is there a way we can get round about it? And we're beginning to look at what we are ending up being as masters of big data sets. By using the local LiDAR, which in the central belt of Scotland is very good,
right, yeah,
and by manipulating bits and pieces of it, we can prove that water won't go from here to there without modelling it. The problem with modelling is that to do a really robust model, it's an iterative process where you have to go back and forward, refining it all the time. And that's what really costs the money. If we can reduce that down so that it only costs 3,000 as opposed to 6,000, we'll win something.
Yeah.
That's where we want to be. We want to try and solve the problem, which is to prove to you, the regulator, in this case, that no, SEPA's maps are wrong with the least amount of input in them that is robust, defendable, and says, no, we can actually say this, and we can defend it. And of course, we've got our professional indemnity insurance behind us.
Yeah.
So there's another this is very pertinent right now. We're trying to work through the data sets and how can we solve these problems without throwing the kitchen sink at it.
Right, fair dues. So if you sum that up in kind of one sentence, then because we've explored that quite a lot, but in one sentence for the listeners, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now?
Our biggest problem is getting in on the work at early doors.
Right. Okay.
If we can assist the client at an early stage, we can save them money.
Right.
To the point where I've got many clients, you're one of them. If you phone up and say, I've got this site, what do you think? We know an awful lot about the central belt of Scotland. We know a lot about Scotland in general,
right,
in terms of its flood risk. You pick up the phone to me and I will say, walk away.
Right. Yeah.
Don't spend money on me. Just walk away. Because you're not going to be able to get this job done. Or, I think you can, but we're going to have to model this and I'll give you an honest opinion. That's where my judgment comes in. And that's something which costs no more than a phone call. That's just good. That's just what we do. Because we're not there to spend the developer's money without getting a result.
Excellent.
You have to get the result.
So
the biggest thing that I would want to do is, because you have to nowadays, but because you also want to, is to do it early doors. Get in touch.
Excellent. So you mentioned earlier that you're 61, so I know how it feels to get older.
You don't.
I'm 50 next week.
Not yet 50.
50 next week. I'm kind of curious then, in terms of Terrenus, you've obviously got your co-director up there, etc. You're still very passionate about water, land, and your business, of course you are. But what does the next 2 or 3 years hold for Terrenus? What do you think is going to go? That could be, in light of everything that's happening in the industry, or just your plans. Anything you can share with us?
Now that we're in a position, it's the best position I've been in for over a decade now.
Right.
Because I've got the team round about us who are competent and capable, and that gives me a great deal of satisfaction.
Great.
I want to see it grow from there. I've got aspirations that I would like to see us grow in terms of size, capabilities. I'd like to be moving into various other fields. We've got people on our staff who are becoming very good engineers, but that's not their first training. Our specialist in hydraulic modelling is a civil engineer.
Right. Okay.
We've got a young lady who would do well in things like environmental impact assessments.
Right.
That's not where we're using our distance. I do want to expand the capabilities of the company, and we've got the capabilities to do that. And I want to expand that in the next. I look forward about 3 to 5 years, and I want to be able to expand in that period. Sooner or later, I will stop. And that's a whole new problem as to what do you do with the company, and that's a new thing. But to do that, I want to be able to expand and have a team that no longer requires me. One of the things that I did when I went to West Africa was I was there for 5 years, and the job was to work yourself out of a job.
Right. Okay.
Now I'm in a similar sort of situation.
Yeah.
So the next 5 years, I want to work myself out of a job.
Yeah.
Where I've left something and it's still functioning. I'm not going to just last one out, please switch off the lights.
Yeah.
But put myself just in a situation where I become redundant.
Yeah.
That would be a target for me personally.
Yeah.
But for the company, I want to see it thrive.
Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, I think I've got the same aspirations in here, is just to make sure a few years back, one of my architecture mentors passed away and his business folded overnight, and that's not, hopefully I've got a few years left in me yet, but it's not something I want to see happening in my business, and probably encourage any of the listeners, if you're growing a business and you've spent 20 odd years, growing a business, the last thing you want to see is that when you go, for whatever reason, that the lights are turned off, because that's not why we're here, really. If I wanted to just be someone who made money and probably had I could probably have a better lifestyle actually working myself from the house than what I've got, trying to grow a team and grow the business. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, Willie, and this question comes not from me, but from our previous guest, bearing in mind he doesn't know who you were. And the question is along the lines of, if someone had to turn around tomorrow and make you the Prime Minister, is there a couple of key things you would change to try and improve the housing industry?
Prime Minister or First Minister?
Either or.
Either.
He did mention actually either or. Yeah.
Either or. To make the housing industry better, well, we have a real problem with housing. We don't seem to be building enough houses. Are we building the right houses in the right places? Good question. I think we should be building in places where there were buildings there before, brownfield sites. How do we liberate these places? We have to push the envelope with regards to the planning process. I don't agree with some of the directions of travel that NPF4 come up with. If I was Prime Minister, First Minister, I would want to rewrite something would be dangerous, but I would want to issue guidelines on how to interpret NPF4 with the proviso that we wanted to see development happen. Do we want to see development happen or not? No, we want to see development happen. We want to see the right development happen? Yes. How do we ensure that? We don't ensure that by avoidance. We ensure that by good engineering. We shouldn't be scared of engineering the problem to make it good for ourselves and for the environment. The two are not mutually exclusive.
No. And I think as sustainability is much more of it's a key fundamental design aspect now for any type of project, and over the next 10 years is going to become even more so. I kind of feel for some of the younger generation of designers, engineers, architects, because it's just something that's being thrust upon them, whereas before it was kind of optional. You could say, right, well, to the client, do you want to do this? You know, you don't need to, but obviously need to comply with the minimum building control standards, environmental legislation. But now it's becoming, no, this is where we're going. We're going for, 2030, zero carbon, 2050 or whatever the years, I can't remember. And you don't have a choice. You're going to have to do it. So, but interestingly there, that NPF4 is I think that's a fundamental thing to be, guidelines, because we're seeing more and more for our clients that the plan, I'm going to just say it actually, if the planners really want your project to fly, NPF4 will support it.
I agree.
If they want any reason for it to not fly, then they can.
You've got the hammer to hit it with.
And it's kind of like, well, either it does one or the other. There should be more guidelines so that there's much more clarity for the developer, for the architects, and also for the planners to say, look, this is specifically what it says. Absolutely. Willie, can you do me the honour of leaving a question for your next guest?
A question for my next guest, for your next guest.
For our next guest, and I appreciate you don't know who they are. Just a bit of fun.
I don't know who that is. No.
Just a bit of fun.
If you were given the power to be able to do so, what is the one thing that you would want to see happen with regards to improving the housing stock in our country?
Excellent. There seems to be a bit of theme on housing over the last few days. I will pass on the question. Hopefully you'll listen in and find out the answer. Well, thank you for your time.
I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Great. Well, thank you for your time in the Hard Hat Talks podcast. That is always a bit of a mouthful for me to say. But it's been my pleasure again, and look forward to releasing it, and hopefully the team will enjoy it.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willie.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.